here we are. This was, I would say, not a series of misfortunate events, but honestly something that took way longer than it should have when trying to set up the stream. Sorry about that. Let me just make sure everything is right. Today we'll be doing the 2026 NBA trade deadline, team by team, kind of what we're looking at, what we're seeing. And yeah, so we're going to start almost an hour late, but we're going to go through the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Los Angeles Lakers, Toronto Raptors, Chicago Bulls, the Sacramento Kings, the Brooklyn Nets, and the Portland Trail Blazers. If you guys do enjoy this content, please feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. It will be greatly appreciated as I help the channel grow. And go check out my article that I just, or interview that I just did for hoopshype.com discussing, or not discussing, having a discussion with Liam McNeely. Now, what are we going to start, or how should we start today's video? And one of the things that I think is rather interesting when looking at what is going around in the NBA, I think the evaluation of players and of course draft picks is just so far apart in what people's opinions are that I don't think there is a right answer, especially when it comes to draft picks. And we've talked about this before, that most of the trades we'll do will not have draft picks, because I just don't want to be tied to the draft pick. So we all know that most of these trades will need to include some sort of trade sweetener, either a draft pick or a young player. So with that being said, I think having the ability to just set up the trade and then you guys can choose what you think is the proper compensation is the better option, in my opinion, when looking at this. That's my 2 cents. If somebody has a better idea, let me know, as I have to set up the green screen real quickly, which literally is going to take me 2 seconds. But we just needed to, I think we should be good if I turn on the green screen. Ooh, just a little piece right there. When we edit this, it's going to be such a bitch. Now, I should have been more prepared. I literally just came from work, but I'm going to go away to Colorado for about a week. And I just came back from Orlando because I was covering the G League showcase. So I was actually just like not here for seemingly the past couple days, and I got home last night, and now we're doing this. So sorry for being kind of all over the place in terms of just how this is set up. This should have been better, but let's get right into it. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. I think the most interesting part in any of this, by the way, what I am going to do is put myself in front of this, or I put an image just now, and I thought the image was going to be right here, but it ended up not. There we go. So we put together all the team needs, and it's kind of going to be a little useful graphic right here. These are the buyers, and man, I guess I should have put Milwaukee in there because they are buyers, but at the same time, are they truly buyers? They could be a team that is standing pat because they have no assets, and that's kind of what I did. So with that being said, Toronto, we also have on here, I think another team we could say Chicago's the buyers, and so is Portland. If these are teams that we could say might be able to make a bigger move, or might be able to do something more than we were originally thinking. So let's get into the first team, which I'll probably start with the Boston Celtics just to go in alphabetical order. And they're a team that I wouldn't be surprised if they might be kind of a seller. I think they want to do a certain type of move where if they were to give up an asset, they would do it for a player that is either recently extended or is still on his rookie deal that they could extend for cheap. So that's why with the Boston Celtics, I think they're going to be an interesting team to look at in this year's NBA trade deadline. So today we're going to do 3 trade targets for the Celtics and the 2026 NBA trade deadline. They're a team that they're 17-11 and they're improving better than expected. And I thought they were always going to be a competent team, at least shooting for a play-in spot, but they have seemingly, I think, exceeded most people's expectations. And they have Anthony Simons and also Sam Hauser, but they probably want to move Anthony Simons as the main player to a team that gives them a player in return that gives them salary cap relief to do some salary cap gymnastics, to dip below the first apron or dip below the second apron and move into the first apron. And if they can move off of most of Anthony Simons' money, I think they could basically get it out of the aprons. So that would be huge. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. If you're a Celtics fan or not, what would you do if you were in their position? As I think this deadline is going to see a lot of moves that are going to be salary cap gymnastics. And this is one of the teams has a 6.6 plus net rating. They're $4 million away from being in the first apron. And I think that financial relief and finding role players on cheaper contracts to replace Anthony Simons expiring would be the most ideal situation. And Anthony making 27.6 and the Boston Celtics currently being, I think with their actual number right now, I think it's 202, could be, yes, it's 202. So they're just over $4 million from being in the first apron. They're still in the second apron. And I think that's or getting out of the first apron, which would be huge. And this is a team that they know they're going to be in contention next year. My apology, at 206 is the official number. So just under the second apron, they have about $7.8 million in space right there, but they're $4 million over. And I think a guy like Ayo Dosunmu would be huge. I think Ayo Dosunmu is my first option if I'm a Celtics fan. I think he fits what they need. Dosunmu's on an expiring contract this season, and he's someone that is only making $7.5 million, and he would be fitting of what Boston needs to shed in salary while maintaining production. He replaces the offensive production with a very efficient season so far, is a better defender at the point of attack, almost 6'5", 200 pounds than the undersized 2 guard that Simons is, and might not be the scorer he is, but just as good of a passer in my opinion. And I think that would be the most, I guess, best situation if you could get someone like a Ayo Dosunmu who you could then be able to re-sign in free agency and have the ability to have him as a really good role player, making probably the same amount of money. So you save $20 million. Now we'll see the logistics of how that trade would go down in a second in the trade machine. The next guy that we know on the trade market is Keon Ellis. His salary of just 2.3 would be the perfect guy. Now you would have to find a team to take on Anthony Simons, but he also is going to be an unrestricted free agent. He brings that point of attack, energetic defense, and disruptive ability. He's got great hand-eye coordination. He's just pickpocketing people all the time, and he's shooting really well, 37%. That has allowed him to space the floor and be potentially a guy who could be a starter or like a 3-and-D option that fits the Celtics' high-volume three-point scheme without needing the ball in his hand. Now, another guy that I think they could realistically get is a Nick Richards, who's on an expiring $5 million. And he is a big that really would fit the center by committee approach that they have, and could be someone that they bring in as a low-cost front court depth piece who can finish at the rim, rebound, and shot block, and is really just an insurance policy at the fraction of the cost of the other bigs in the league. And I think that's kind of a realistic situation if you're a fan of the Boston Celtics, that you're going to be looking for players that aren't the sexiest names. And I don't want to seem like I am being rude in terms of, oh, they should go ahead and just not do that. I think that'd be the wrong way of looking at it. You need to set yourselves up financially and with players who can plug and play. And if you have to use this gap year to find those said players, I don't really think it's a loss. So behind me, we have the trade machine, and I should have put the trade machine closer to me, but It's right here. So let's get right into it and discuss what could be some of the moves that we see Boston set a trade up. So we first had over here was obviously the idea of, before Keon Ellis, I don't know why I'm blanking on this, Ayo DeSumo, who's on the Bulls, and the Bulls are obviously trying to be competitive, and I know they're trying to move Kobe White, so someone could say, would they trade Anthony Simons for Kobe White? I just think they probably can get a lot more in return for their investment, and I want to show you guys that straight up, if you were to send Anthony Simons to the Bulls, this is a team that, with Ayo DeSumo making 7.5, and Anthony Simons making about 27.6. In terms of the salary cap implications, this trade isn't feasible due to that $20 million that is missing. And this is where I think you'd have to expand the trade and look at a guy like Nikola Vucevic to be moved. And I think a deal like this would be if you're able to find a place for a Nikola Vucevic to be able. Vucevic needs to go somewhere else, and you probably are going to want something in return if you're the Nets and whatever team or whatever other team that would. It's probably the Nets because they have the salary cap to do something like this. And I think that the Warriors are a team that might be desperate enough to hop in on this, where they're like, we'll take Vucevic, all right, if Brooklyn takes Jonathan Kuminga. And we know Brooklyn isn't interested in him, but if they're able to do that and you figure out a way to compensate Brooklyn for them to be interested in, they get out of Kuminga's money after this season due to the fact that they're able to not need to worry about the salary implications as he has a team option. And right here, the problem is, like, Brooklyn would eat $22 million, but as you see, a lot of these guys, with Boston over here being able to now have $35 million in cap space, $8 million with the Bulls being over to do this deal, and behind me it's about 1.8 for the Warriors. So the Celtics would probably end up having to take on some salary, and I think they would be fine with it if it's maybe, I think a guy like Terrence Mann wouldn't be the end of the world. They ended up getting someone like that. I know someone would be like, why would they want that salary? It really could be because they think that maybe it fits the long-term projection of this team. And I think Day'Ron Sharpe and Terrence Mann would be two guys that would fit there. And this is where it becomes difficult to see what else would need to be done to make that trade feasible, because then you start putting too many players into the pot and it becomes hard to see, like, can we make that work and is it actually realistic? And I think that's the hardest part to figure out, if you can get that to work, because I think Boston is a team able to go ahead and make multiple moves. Like right here, I think if you look at the biggest thing is the Nets, and this deal actually is passable. This deal works. Okay. By the way, you wouldn't be able to happen until Jonathan Kuminga is trade eligible in January. Warriors get Vucevic, Kuminga goes to the Nets, Simons to the Bulls, and then Terrence Mann, Ayo DeSumo, Day'Ron Sharpe go to the Celtics. All three guys would be huge for a team like the Celtics in next year's playoff run. Now, we also said Keon Ellis. This is a little bit difficult because, again, it's literally the same principle of having Anthony Simons dumped. Like all these deals, if you're going to go for a cheap contract like Keon Ellis, who is a fit, you're going to end up having to find someone to dump. Or would you be able to do basically Keon Ellis and Malik Monk? You're probably going to have to throw in trade sweetener to get this deal done, but an Anthony Simons probably draft capital, most likely draft capital for Malik Monk and Keon Ellis. Both teams get salary cap relief, and they really don't have to duke it out on what is proper compensation for either players, because they're kind of getting the salary cap, and if you give up a draft pick, it could really push that deal over. You know, I think that's what you're hoping for. And I think when you look at the current setup of these teams, I think 3-point shooting is something that the Boston Celtics hold at a premium, and rim protection is something that I think they know helps win games. So when this other trade that I brought up, Nick Richards, would this be maybe you try to get a Grayson Allen really a Grayson Allen and a Nick Richards, which then obviously allows them to get out of the money of Grayson Allen, and Nick Richards is an expiring. You can figure out the draft capital. Both teams are out of the aprons there. And I feel like both teams, again, there'll probably have to be draft capital for Grayson Allen, who's a decent player, but he's maybe making more money than they're comfortable paying. So in turn, I think having this be the fallback option is not out of the realm of possibility. So that's just my thoughts right there with the Boston Celtics on what they could do this trade deadline. And if we go to the next team that we'll be discussing on our list, and it's the Milwaukee Bucks, which I think a lot of people are going to be like, what tier will we put the Bucks in? Because Milwaukee, I think they're trying to figure out if they're going to be in the market to contend and Giannis will allow them, or will they have to be fielding offers finally as Giannis wants to leave? And they're usually, when a guy of Giannis's caliber asks out, he usually forces his way to the destination of his choice. And with that being said, what would that destination be? Obviously, we're hearing the Knicks are a big one. We're hearing the Lakers, the Heat. I really think that would be the three. And those would be the three teams that I think the Lakers can't do it, but I think the Knicks and the Heat are very able to put a good offer. The Spurs and OKC can blow out, and so maybe Houston as well, blow out many offers, but they're, from my understanding, not interested in doing that, and nor blowing up or giving up the players that Milwaukee would want. The dark horse is Atlanta because they own Milwaukee's picks, and they're not going to give up Jalen Johnson, so it would be built around Kristaps Porzingis, and that'd be a whole other discussion. But if they we're going to operate under the assumption that the Milwaukee Bucks are going to be a team that this year, 11-18, they have a negative 3.7 net rating. They have limited draft assets, and their primary need is a major piece to convince Giannis Antetokounmpo to stay, or really some player in combination to shake up a stale roster. I think the hardest thing to do is to find a guard. They need a guard, and I think that guy could be Anthony Simons. He represents a major swing on the franchise need, as he's an expiring contract, and the way that they would have to get it is going to be hard, but he does solve the point guard position in theory, or the guard position, as him and Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins, the three of them would make a really good trio. And this is a Bucks offense that is currently ranked 23rd in the standings, and as I mentioned earlier, a -4 almost net rating. And Anthony Simons is a pretty good half-court shot creator who can carry the offensive load, addressing the team's need for a perimeter engine to pair with Giannis, Kyle Kuzma, and Miles Turner. Now, if you don't want another ball handler, really someone he's small. If you're going to go for an offensive player, and if you want that guy like Chris Middleton, who was that bailout artist who can come in, and if Giannis or somebody can't find the shot, he'll kill him in the mid-range. That's DeMar DeRozan. And he's someone who can, he's not on an insane contract. He's still an elite mid-range scorer, still a great passer, and a great shot creator. Now, the spacing would be imperfect, but having Miles Turner there really helps. And he'll be able to get to his spots and relieve the pressure on the Bucks in crunch time, in the clutch, which helps a team that is currently 11-18 and has had some catastrophic second half collapse. And then another guy, I think, obviously, Zach LaVine should be thrown in with Dennis Schroeder. Basically, to get either, or not Dennis Schroeder, with DeMar DeRozan. To get DeMar DeRozan, you could do a deal. I think it's Cole Anthony, Bobby Portis, and Gary Harris. And then to get DeMar DeRozan. And then with Zach LaVine, it would have to be Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis, and then Cole Anthony as well. And I think Gary Harris maybe has two. But while a guy like Dennis Schroeder, again, I think the Kings might offer them. And if you don't like Anthony Simons and we go back to them needing a guard, I think if they can't find a star, like any trade attempt fails, Schroeder offers a guy who is a competitor. He'll be a ball handler on a mid-level contract. He brings point of attack defense and the ability to organize the offense that the Bucks have lacked in their backcourt consistently. No offense to Ryan Rollins or Kevin Porter Jr. They've done an admirable job given the circumstances. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into what these trades may potentially look like if we were to see them executed. So with that being said, I think the biggest thing that people need to understand is Milwaukee doesn't have trade assets, so they're going to have to figure out a way to sweeten whatever package they make. And a lot of these deals were with Kings guys, so we're just going to show you the iterations of those Kings deals right here. And I said it before, the one that to me makes the most sense, no offense to Bobby Portis, who I still think he's a serviceable player. I just don't think he's serviceable to the Milwaukee Bucks anymore. And DeMar DeRozan is the same player, obviously not that he once was, but to what they want in a bailout artist a la Chris Middleton from a few seasons ago. This trade passes all the financial restrictions. He'd be on an expiring deal next year. So in theory, if they had to move off of him after this season, it's not impossible. While Cole Anthony being on a 1-year deal, Gary Harris also being on a 2-year deal with the second year being a player option, and Bobby Portis only being the one on a long-term contract, but it's cost-controlled mid-level value, so it's not like it's ostentatious of them to give it to them. Now, we mentioned that if they did a Zach LaVine trade, it's going to have to include a guy by the name of Kyle Kuzma. Currently, they're only at 19.3, and once you put the $22 million that a guy like Kyle Kuzma brings, that's 41.7, and it allows for this deal to happen. And I think it's not insane. I think, obviously, if you're Milwaukee, you might want to see somebody attached in this deal. Would that be maybe a Devin Carter? Because you're taking on Zach LaVine's contract, which is just a negative. And would you like the dream scenario? I don't even know if like you'd want Dario Saric, but yeah, I think this would maybe be the ideal situation if you're Milwaukee. This deal can happen because they'd be 2.7 over. And I think if you could theoretically, Kevin Porter's making 5.1. So in theory, if you switched out Kevin Porter, I think for Cole Anthony, even though Cole Anthony hasn't been as good as Kevin Porter Jr., the deal is possible where Zach LaVine, Keon Ellis, Dario Saric, for Kyle Kuzma, Kevin Porter, and Gary Harris. Now, we mentioned one deal that looked like Dennis Schroeder, which we'll also get into the Anthony Simons one, but the Dennis Schroeder only making $14 million is actually kind of a godsend for them. And they would theoretically be able to stack some contracts if they needed. And I think the best way or the most ideal way for this to happen, I would hope that they'd be able, I mean, it would be Bobby Portis, but I'm trying to see if they could do a package that is maybe like Kevin Porter Jr. and Cole Anthony and Gary Harris's contracts, where in that case, they would be able to, that's $13 million combined. Now, they would need to fill in the roster, but if you get Dennis Schroeder, and maybe you throw in Andre Jackson or you do something, but you try to get another one of their end of the bench guys that might be of service for you, like a Drew Eubanks. And I think the only, like, again, if you could get Keon Ellis in here, that would churn this deal that already works even better, because then you'd be able to flip Porter. Maybe you have to throw in, but the idea is the financial flexibility you give them. You get off of the money off of Schroeder, and the Bucks get themselves a guard. Now, you look at Boston. This is the one that is a tough pill to swallow, in my opinion, because it's $27 million you'd be tying yourself to. And I wonder if this sort of deal, would they try to get Sam Hauser in this, where you give up, because right there, that's $37 million, and a combination of Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis for both of them. And I know they're on longer term deals, but it would give the Boston Celtics, both of those players fit their championship aspirations, but they're also on cost controlled, not too expensive contracts that they could realistically flip again, while Sam Hauser and Anthony Simons gives the offensive punch that the Milwaukee Bucks sorely need. So let me know your thoughts on that one. I definitely think it's interesting to say the least. Now, let's move forward with what we want to continue speaking about, and that is the team needs for the Los Angeles Clippers. This could go two ways. I mean, they're acting like they're going to keep pushing through, which I think is kind of insane. Well, I almost missed my mouth. But if they do believe that pushing through is the best action for Los Angeles, then they need to get younger. They need help. I think they're a team that's kind of in this weird juxtaposition. I think really if they could trade Zubats, who recently got hurt, it'd be great. They're $1.2 million under the First-apron. They're a team that needs to choose which way they want to go. Now, they've been good for like the last 10 to 15 years. So this being their first bad season in that time span is incredible. But going 7-21, negative 5.4 net rating. They're $1.2 million under the First-apron. They just need a shake-up. They need to get younger. They need cheaper players. The current core needs to be maximized if that's what they want to do. Now, what is a way that they could double down? And that is by bringing in somebody from the Kings like a DeMar DeRozan or a Zach LaVine. And this is just a team that's in a tailspin. They need a talent infusion. That's why Anthony Simons is another guy. If you didn't want to do Zach LaVine, and again, this is the thing, like, do they want to commit themselves to the money? Jeremy Grant would be someone that I think that could help, but he's also older, and I don't think they want to go down the older route. Kyle Kuzma, I think, would be another one if they're giving up a player that the Bucks have interest in. And this team needs to improve, they need to improve their scoring. That's a big part. And I think finding a player that can score would be huge, especially someone who has the shooting ability that would provide spacing for James Harden and Kawhi, and potentially salvaging a disastrous season where they don't own or control their own draft pick. And I mentioned it before, DeMar kind of makes sense because given how badly the team falls apart offensively when James Harden leaves the court, DeRozan could be a cheap. Same thing as I mentioned earlier, Simons, players that can provide a secondary offensive hub who can run the unit when Harden sits, which would address the team's reliance on one playmaker, the only passing guard they have, and Kawhi isn't what he used to be. And then the cheap option, Jose Alvarado at $4.5 million. Alvarado fits the cheap, flexible need, and his defensive pressure, the Pelicans are plus 7 points per 100 possessions better with him, and he'd give them the energy that a lethargic team needs. So we'll add a couple more in there as we go, because I feel like there's a lot of players that could fit what they would need or what could really help them, as they're in a precarious situation where they just need to stop being so old. And I think if they cannot find a player who can help them get out of that being so old look, it could salvage their season. Now, you have to understand that John Collins would be the trade chip for any of these moves. And Forward, we're going to real quickly go into the Kings. I don't want to really focus on them because in terms of the realm of possibility, I just don't think they're the team that they should be doing business with, as there's better options. There are better options, in my opinion, than the Sacramento Kings being the only ones fielding an offer from them. So that's just my sense on it. And I don't know why I can't see the Kings on this list. So that's embarrassing. So we'll just restart it. Oh, it's because they're 15th and it gets cut off. I literally can't even click it because it's so far removed. Oh, and like, because my screen, the way it's set up is, yep, there we go. We can hit the Kings now. Much better. Let me fix the aspect right there. I apologize to everyone. That's just not going to get edited. So there we go. Much better. Now the Kings, and then we'll have next to them the Clippers. Now, these are the two worst teams in the Western Conference. Zach LaVine, $47 million. This is a team that is $13 million below the second apron. Again, if they were going to do a deal here, I think they'd rather do John Collins for DeMar DeRozan. But a Zach LaVine deal, John Collins with Bogdan Bogdanovic would more than likely be the deal. They're already trying to get off of Bogdan's money, and they would still be $4 million short from being able to do this deal. And that's the whole problem there, is like, all right, if they were going to throw, it'd probably be Brook Lopez, and then they'd probably want Keon Ellis back, and that'd be the whole trade. That's kind of what I think is what would end up happening there. We mentioned Jose Alvarado, which I want to do because we talked a lot about Anthony Simons here, and I think every deal that the Celtics could get themselves in, they'd be like, so we have Anthony Simons, and would you be interested in that? Now, Jose Alvarado is probably going to cost a draft pick. He's a guy who has another year on his deal, and he's probably one of the better backup point guards in the NBA and better spot starters. So this is where I think it becomes hard. Maybe you do use a Brook Lopez with a Kobe Brown as the trade sweetener, because I can't imagine anything else being really used as a trade sweetener. And you have, man, I would like Carlo Matikovic come here, but I think they value him way more than most people do. So I don't think he would get traded. I would love for that to happen. So Saddiq Bey kind of seems like a guy that could help them. And in this deal, you basically turn Saddiq Bey, Jose Alvarado into the two new additions that give you a two-way guy in Saddiq Bey who could be a reclamation project on a cheap deal. Kobe Brown's, they declined his team option, so he's going to be gone. And Brook Lopez gives a veteran to be a voice of reason for the Pelican squad. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. We mentioned the Boston Celtics earlier, and I think this would be just John Collins for Anthony Simons. They almost make the same exact salaries. They're both expiring deals. It'd be a 1-for-1. Now, what if there had to be a trade sweetener? And the Celtics were like, well, we're also trying to dump, or we'll also include somebody. Who could that be? I think this is where we bring in Sam Hauser and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Maybe they regret paying Sam that money and they can't move off of him. And Bogdan Bogdanovic has a team option for next year, so he's basically an expiring contract. And there you go. They get some shooting, and they get Anthony Simons, and the Celtics get cap relief, which would be huge, because then going into next season, the books would be completely cleared. So I think for the Clippers, the best deal is the Pelicans. I think that's the one that's not going to cost them too much. And if you look around the league, I think that's the best they're going to be able to do. So what do you guys think on that one? I think it's definitely an interesting situation, to say the least, because this is a squad that for so long it was like, oh, they need to be healthy, and potentially they could be in contention. but it never came and never happened. And I think that's where I sit. Like, it's almost depressing because every year it felt like this will be the year. This will be the year. No, next year. And Tyronn Lue looks like he just wants to get fired. It's a bad situation from what I've heard. The Los Angeles Lakers are still riding high from the Luka Doncic trade, but they're in the wheelhouse to make a move. This is a team that right now, with LeBron pouting and being upset that they're going to move on from him after this year, they're not going to trade him. That would be a league rocking trade. He's just going to go walk in free agency and probably either re-sign with the Cavs or go somewhere that we don't know yet, or just retire. Now they're 19-8, Austin Reeves, and if they traded Austin Reeves, it would literally be just for Giannis. And they would have to tell Austin Reeves people that they're going to give him the maximum contract. Now, I think they want to prioritize cap flexibility, and I think they want to be able to compete right now while not handicapping themselves into any bad long-term money. Robert Williams, I think, would be one of the best options for them. He's on an expiring $13.3 million deal. He's playing enough to be a center in the rotation if they continue the center by committee approach. And him with Jackson Hayes and DeAndre Ayton would be a great trio. Plus, he has rapport with Ayton from their time in Portland. Now he's a risk, but when he's healthy, he's still a solid rim protector and a lob threat who can pair with Luka Doncic to form a lob threat defensive duo, but on as well as play alongside Rui Hachimura, but really be a solid guy for them. Another player that I think would be very good for them would be Keon Ellis. He could be someone that they could use a guy like Dalton Connect that really has not much trade value, and Keon Ellis might not get any trade offers that the Kings like because everybody might be lowballing them because they know he's a rental or might not commit to them. But you trade Dalton Connect there. He's a reclamation project for the Kings. And you talk with Keon Ellis's people and you're like, hey, we trade for you. You commit under the table to re-sign with us this offseason. And you do that, as he's a high defensive player who I think he's perfect to play alongside LeBron and Luka, shooting 37% this year from three, and he's an ideal kick-out option who won't clog the Lakers' spacing and really is just a defensive dog that they need to alleviate the games that Marcus Smart gets in foul trouble or isn't playing. Now another guy, Ochai Agbaji. This is one that is sort of a reclamation project who did get his restricted free agency. He's on a $6.3 million deal. Last year, he had a solid year for them, for the Raptors. This year, it kind of wasn't the same thing. Also, he's role shifted. He's not in the same role. He's not even playing. He's playing the last 5 games he's played, but before the last 5 games, he was 10 to 15 minutes a night after playing almost 30 minutes a game last year. So if he can give them a similar production to last year's numbers when he played 64 games, 27 minutes a night, 10.5 points, almost 50% from the field, 40% almost from 3, 4 rebounds, 1.5 assists, about a steal a night. That is the player that could give the depth, and he could be a small ball 4, more of a 3, or a big 2 at times that the Lakers crave, and he would be a low financial risk that if it works out, they get his restricted free agency and they could bring him back, which TBH, I think they wouldn't mind that. I don't think anybody team wouldn't mind that. So let's get right into it and let's talk about each of these trades. We're going to start because I thought that Raptors talk was a little riveting about Ochai Agbaji, and I think that's a pickup that really won't cost the Lakers much on the dollar. And yeah, let's get into it. Who would they trade? I think this is another, maybe Dalton Connect is too rich, or if they could get Maxi Kleber, maybe the Raptors are like, we just don't want Dalton Connect's money, where he just doesn't fit what we're doing. Then I think Maxi Kleber would be the first option. An expiring contract gives them another big, a foreign big, that Darko Rajakovic. I think would like as a reserve. And if they were just to do this, they wouldn't be able to eat the salary because it would make the Raptors 4.6 over the allowable salary incoming from a trade. So that's where you probably have to trade a player, change the player you trade, because if you look at the rest of the roster, it doesn't have any players that have a salary of $5 million or around that range that really could solve that issue. So then you go and you look at the rest of the roster. All right. It kind of puts you back into that Dalton Connect situation where I think he might end up being your best option. Obviously, you're not going to be trading Bronny James, and I mean, you might like Adu Thiero could be like the sweetener here, but I think something along this lines could be realistic. But the bigger problem is this is probably going to have to be a multi-team trade, because just trading Dalton Connect wouldn't allow that trade to work. So I think this is where maybe a team, I get like the Brooklyn Nets could be the ones, as they have a guy like, I think a Haywood Highsmith who could really be a sweetener in this, or be a guy that could be used to get this deal to facilitate. So if you were to send to the Lakers Haywood Highsmith, you send Maxi Kleber to, and again, there probably have to be some sort of trade sweetener. Maybe Dalton Connect goes to the Nets to get them to take on this salary, but this would have to be the way that this ends up going. And of course, it's acting like where's the assets going out? I thought we sent, oh yeah, this is how you could either do it like this. That's actually possible, where you have the Raptors just get draft pick compensation, or Adu Thiero could be the guy that they send to the Raptors that maybe they're like, yeah, we'll take the athleticism, and that ends up being the sweetener, and the draft pick compensation goes to the Nets. But yeah, I think something along those lines is not out of the realm of possibility. So we brought up two other trades. Keon Ellis, feels like we've talked about him multiple times, and they would obviously, I think a Keon Ellis trade would be the Dalton Connect and swap right there, because that would just be the easiest way to get that done. And I think we did that already, but just to show you again, boom. So who else could be someone that, and obviously that was who we mentioned earlier, they would be interested in a Robert Williams. So Robert Williams, and another big, I really just don't see another big being of that caliber being available for them to have the possibility of getting. So that's why, and they could theoretically get Matisse Thybulle in this deal. So we'll show you the first iteration that I thought of. Again, it's the Maxi Kleber and with Tiego's splitter. And this deal, the problem is they'd be 3.2 or 2.2 below or over from being able to get it done. So that's where you look at Dalton Connect, and that is the kind of trade sweetener you'd have to use to get this deal done if you didn't want to use any draft pick compensation. And would you ask for like a Duop Reith or somebody to on the back end to be traded to give you depth? And that's where I think a Reith would be like the guy that you'd ask for, as he's a big who can shoot the ball and he's an older player. But again, right here, adding Reith made this deal not possible. So it would have to be a 2-for-1, my apology, which then would be Dalton Connect and Maxi Kleber for Robert Williams. Maybe you get some second round picks. It'd be a reclamation project for the Trailblazers, and you get the defender. I think this is more if you're going in. I'd rather get Day'Ron Sharpe with this package than, I don't know, if, like, honestly, one Brooklyn Nets trade that we'll do before we wrap this up is, I think this is a better, if that's what you're going to offer, Kleber and Connect, I think that's where I'd end up putting a guy along the lines of Haywood Highsmith and Day'Ron Sharpe together, because Day'Ron Sharpe and Haywood Highsmith together make about what? I also like how I just can't find. I'm looking for Haywood Highsmith after having clicked him, but Day'Ron Sharpe's right there. And then, of course, Maxi Kleber, Dalton Connect. You send that because right there you have yourself 15 million going out and 11.8 coming in. And this is the trade that I like better. You get yourself Day'Ron Sharpe, who's already extended. You get Dalton Connect as the reclamation project and sweetener for the Nets, and you get Haywood Highsmith, who kind of fits this team. What do you guys think? I feel like that's not a terrible one. Like, there could be worse trades out there if you were going to do one. Now, if we go ahead and move forward with our list, I think the next interesting candidates for trade would be, obviously, drum roll please, we've actually discussed them at length before, and I just realized you guys have been commenting. I forgot. Now, Clippers, Cavs are kind of screwed. I agree. Derek White would be great, but I think it would just be hard to get into, like, I think it just, like, Zubats is your best player, and him being hurt right now makes it really hard, but there's a lot going on. I'm also reading your guys' comments, so I'm thinking Sixers. We can do Sixers. Look, I have a list I'm going through, so I guess we could do the Sixers, but that wasn't in the order that I was going to do. So A1 head honcho, we'll do Sixers last. Cam Thomas could be the guy to the Clippers, and I think if you were going to do that, it's like Kobe Brown and Brook Lopez for Cam Thomas, and maybe like Jalen Wilson. My understanding is Trey Murphy, Alvarado, Zion Williamson, like the front office has no allegiance to any of that. So I don't know. I just, they're a very hard situation to crack from what I've asked around. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that one. Now, the Toronto Raptors are a team that I think, if you look at Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes, I think that it works. They're +1 net rating. They're 17 and 13. I was able to talk to Darko Rajakovic when they came and played the Heat pregame and postgame. And this is a team that I think is supremely confident in their ability. Now, this team has 20, oh my God, I couldn't speak right there. 20.4 assist ratio. They need I think, kind of like a connector. Someone to pair in between Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram who can space the floor and be like this defensive safety valve while also being a floor raiser. Anthony Davis is the guy that I think is the best player that they could get. This is kind of similar to the Kawhi Leonard situation where the Raptors are looking to raise their ceiling. I think Davis is the only guy who could be a game changer, who would immediately make them a contender in the East, and they wouldn't be able to get a player of his caliber in free agency. He's still a good player who raises any team's defensive rating, and he's someone who legit can give you 20 plus points and 10 plus rebounds any night, and that capability would anchor the Raptors front court. Another one would be a Domantas Sabonis. It's kind of iffy with the spacing on that one, but again, he's a guy that would allow them to not worry about having a true point guard because they would run everything off of Sabonis and have Ingram and Scotty play off of that. As he fits the Raptors' high assist culture, the team has a 20.4 assist ratio, which is insane. He's an elite screener, great passer, and he's averaged 6 assists over the last 7 years. He's an all NBA caliber player that would supercharge the Raptors' offense, provided they'd keep enough shooting to surround him. And if both of those guys are too expensive or too, grandiose in terms of being acquired, I do believe Bobby Portis could be a nice little pickup if they give their scraps to the Milwaukee Bucks. As I think, first off, I was told last year that after they traded for Brandon Ingram, that the Toronto Raptors are a team that do most of their free agency and off-season work at the trade deadline, because they can't entice players to come there. You have to usually overpay them to come, and it's easier just to trade for those players who are already extended, so they're locked in. And as I say that, if there isn't a superstar trade available, I think Bobby Portis would bring toughness, six-man scoring ability, and floor spacing that this team needs. He would strengthen the bench rotation as they make a playoff push. So let's get right into what those trades could look like. We'll do the Anthony Davis and Sabonis first, and then Bobby Portis will be last. I think the biggest thing when we look at all of this, big picture, they're trying to contend. And I don't think in a universe where if they're truly trying to contend, there isn't going to be the opportunity to get, and I know Anthony Davis with the contract, and there's an out with with him. You don't have to give it an extension. And for what he's going to cost, you're never going to be able to find a player of his caliber at that value. And that's where I sit here. I'm like, if you can acquire him, then you do it, because it would be foolish not to. I think they would trade Donovan Clingan. That's where I would build this package around. I know some people are going to be like, oh, it's going to be like Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, which I think that's the simplest form of that deal. I think that's like $59 million, but you could have them put in Caleb Martin in the deal, and that would make the numbers work. And you give them a point guard and then a wing player who fits what they're doing. Like that makes the numbers work. That straight up makes everything work. You can choose the draft capital that's there. Now, there's another realm of, I think that's what the trade framework would more than likely be. The other version of that trade is where maybe they want to keep Emmanuel Quickley for the paint touches. And, I think it would have to be, Emmanuel Quickley would be the guard that they probably want to keep because it gives them a six-man. And I think RJ Barrett is someone that maybe doesn't fit what Dallas would want in compensation or in return. Now, real quick, let me just turn off the recently signed restriction, which is this one. And you put 19 plus the 32, that gets you already at 51. So the trade sweetener in this one, you have, and I don't even know what the trades are, probably draft picks right here, but Ochai Agbaji, and I think this works for both teams. Well, holds back right here. They'd be $5 million over. So that's where it becomes hard. If they wanted to do anything else, then you're going to have to start dismantling the roster, and it's just not going to happen. So then we go to the Sacramento Kings, and it's really a similar package of either RJ Barrett or Emmanuel Quickley, or the two of them, because you can do RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley together and have them send you Malik Monk with Sabonis, and that ends up working because it's basically only $1 million extra incurred by the Raptors. So that you get the ball handler replacement in Monk for giving up both Quickley and Barrett, and Monk gives you shooting, while Barrett fits the need for a wing alongside Keegan Murray, and Emmanuel Quickley gives you, Schroeder, Westbrook, and Quickley. It's not terrible. You can, again, figure out the draft pick compensation. Now, let's say it's not Malik Monk, and it's not, they want to keep Emmanuel Quickley for the shooting, and it's built around RJ Barrett. That's 27 to 42. Like, that's about $15 million in difference. And that's where it gets, again, difficult to figure out where you're going to find that money. Is that going to be you combining like Grady Dick and Ochai Agbaji, which would then put you at roughly $39 million, and you could maybe ask for like a Drew Eubanks and Doug McDermott back, which are like league minimum veterans who would fill out the back end of the roster. And the problem there is they would be 3.2 over. So what if we take off both of the last two guys that I included? But again, the Sabonis, you can't have these deals be too difficult, and they would need to include a second player or another player, the Raptors, to make this offer valid, or include Jakob Poeltl is the other thing. And they've been saying that if they trade for Sabonis, they want Jakob Poeltl to stay so they can keep his defensive liabilities hidden. Now, the final option, which honestly isn't like crazy if you really think about it, a Bobby Portis, and the Bucks might be desperate and maybe they want to also get off the long-term money. And it's not like it's an insane contract. He's making $13 million this year. But Ochai Agbaji is one of those guys that I think maybe they're asking, they're like, hey, could you bring us Ochai Agbaji? All right. And I think that isn't crazy. And Bobby Portis and Ochai Agbaji right there wouldn't make the deal possible. But I think let's try just Ochai, but I think you would have to include Grady Dick. Yeah, because it would be about $7 million over the allowable amount. And Ochai and Grady Dick could be two guys that the Raptors believe that they won't extend. So they tell a team like the Bucks that, like, yeah, we know you want some young talent, some people to help your team. So we'll send you those two. Just send us Amir Coffey and Andre Jackson as like the other two, just so we could make this work. Now, this would be $2 million over. So the Raptors I want to see if they take off both of those players, and if they do a 3-1, which then a 3-1. So you probably reroute one of Grady Dick or Jonathan Magbo into a bigger deal. But that makes sense. And now you've turned two guys, that Magbo and Agbaji, who aren't really in this team's future, and Grady Dick, who he could be a part of the team's future, but his contract being eligible for extension next year and him seemingly not fitting into the timeline or the core of this team would be a reason why they trade him. So that's one thought right there. Now let's go to the next team that we'll be discussing here. And I think one of the teams that people are probably surprised, the Chicago Bulls. They're a squad that, man, they started the year hot. I know it was Fagaze, but they're 13-5. Josh Giddey is a walking triple-double, but they're almost a -4 net rating. They've been in play-in purgatory for what seems like forever. And I think what they need to do is use Nikola Vucevic and Kobe White's expiring contract and the value that they still have, either as cap flexibility for salary cap gymnastics, or just to like trade them to teams that are desperate for help to get some help on the defensive end. I think that's the biggest thing. They need someone who is a 3-and-D player, a two-way guy who can defend and avoid mediocrity. Now, we'll give you one guy that I think a walking bucket, if you move Vucevic and you don't want to, let's say you don't want to take Kuminga on and you reroute Kuminga somewhere like the Brooklyn Nets, I think a package of Terrence Mann and Cam Thomas isn't wild. You get a defender and a good role player in Terrence Mann, but then you get a guy like Cam Thomas who could really help your offense and then make it easier to trade Kobe White, who you could trade to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a package of like Rob Dillingham and etc. So Cam Thomas is a guy who would just give them a pure scorer who's a 20 plus per game scorer. Yeah, his defense is suspect, but if you're moving off of Kobe White and Vucevic, you're going to need someone who's going to have the ability to create offense from nothing. And that's going to address the Bulls' need for a dynamic scoring punch, especially if they move two of their scoring players. And it's been said if they move Vucevic, I think, and that Zach Collins and Jalen Smith would be there, but I think they would need a third guy. And we've mentioned him before, but Robert Williams making $13 million. If you could find a trade where maybe you do send Kuminga to the Blazers, Vucevic to the Warriors, and Robert Williams to the Bulls. As Vucevic, you'd be moving off of him, and this team just has struggled with rim protection. I think Robert Williams in a center by committee approach would allow this team to have the ability to go ahead, and I know Zach Collins missed the start of the season due to a left wrist fracture that happened in the preseason, but he came back and he's been playing, and so far he's in 18 minutes a night. He's averaging 9 points. He's been fantastic for this team the past, like, so far in a Bulls uniform. You want to hear what Zach Collins is doing? Zach Collins as a Bull in 35 games, 8 starts, he's averaging 19 minutes a night, 55% from the field on 6 field goal attempts a game, 33% from 3 on 2 a night attempts from deep a night, and averaging 6 rebounds a night, 4 defensive and 1.5 offensive. So, like, he's actually been really well. And you pair that with Robert Williams, who's a vertical spacer and a defensive anchor that the Bulls desperately lack. He would improve their defense that currently contributes to their negative net rating. And next, I think if they can go ahead and find themselves somebody to pair, like, Kevin Huerter's been fantastic for them. All right. And if they can find another guy like that, and I know they would probably use Kevin Huerter to find that guy, as he's an expiring contract making $18 million. I wouldn't necessarily say Kevin Huerter's a game changer, but he's a solid wing, and maybe they just keep him. But finding their Kevin Huerter replacement, or someone who can do what Huerter's doing, would be huge, because they need someone that no one totally understands what the Bulls are thinking, but would fit what they need, give them some size, shooting, and his expiring contract, Kevin Huerter, would allow them to use that to find a player. I mean, obviously, he's someone that can space the floor without the ball in his hand, and he was fantastic for them last year, but he's been awful this year. So when you look around the league and you try to think of players of similar value, I think there's a multitude of options that we can choose from. But I really wanted to say that I would go ahead and try to see if I could break that up into 2 players. And obviously Jonathan Isaac could be the guy that you want, but, like, I think in this team needing 3-point shooting, I just don't know if, like, you would give up that luxury of just bringing a big to kind of fill that void, which I don't think would be an adequate job of filling it. Now, Luke Kennard could be someone that they're interested in, and I think they could maybe have Luke Kennard and maybe another player, and send him back, Kevin Huerter, back to Atlanta. That could work in Atlanta. Maybe if they're interested in getting off of some money, that might be in the realm of possibilities of what they do, as I do think this is a team in need of, like, 2-way defense, but, like, all the defenders that you would want to trade for are on good teams. So let's go through the first couple options that I mentioned earlier, and then we'll get into solving what they could use Kevin Huerter for. I think it's just more likely that they would they keep Kevin Huerter and just let his contract expire, and maybe re-sign him on a cheaper deal if they believe that they could be able to fix the problems as he's had this year. So we're going to do that quick Cam Thomas trade that I had mentioned at first, that I think would be kind of cool if they could do. Like, Terrence Mann's a guy who can play multiple positions, and then Cam Thomas gives you that scoring punch. And as I mentioned, this would have to have, like, the Warriors, maybe the Pacers get on this, but I think somebody's going to be looking for, like, Jonathan Kuminga's cap flexibility that he gives with his contract. And that's just kind of like what, and obviously I feel like there's going to have to be a reason or a way that the Bulls there's going to have to be a reason why the Nets take on the money, but it's not money, it's an expiring contract. So you're getting off. The reason why they do the deal is to get off of Terrence Mann. So the one thing though is Jonathan Kuminga cannot be traded until January 15th. So this deal works, actually. So ignore the fail. I think this is a great deal. Vooch goes to the Warriors, and the reason why maybe no draft pick compensation is needed is because of Terrence Mann being a multi-year deal that they get off of. Now, here we go. With the Warriors, there could be a different player, but I really think it's Kuminga being the guy that is utilized here to move off of money, and it's with the Blazers being involved instead of the Nets in this scenario, and Robert Williams being the piece that goes to the Bulls. The Warriors send Kuminga to the Blazers. Now, the Blazers would be taking on like $9 million extra here, so that's where I wonder, like, is there somebody here? And that's where I could say maybe the other deal they do is a Jeremy Grant, because right here they'd be $1.1 million over the allowable salary. And that's kind of like where I just find it like difficult for me to see this through, where you're like, okay, I can see the argument being made for this deal to work, but here, let's try this real quickly. What if, and I also sent Dupe Reith to the wrong team. I want to send Dupe to the Warriors and Trace Jackson Davis to the Bulls as like kind of like a trade sweetener, and that should make the deal financially feasible. And Trace would actually be a perfect like pickup for a Bulls team. And right there it works. The deal would not be able to happen until January 15th, but Vooch and Duop Reith go to the Warriors, give them some front court depth. Kuminga is just like kind of, you could also say Trace Jackson Davis can go to the Blazers, but I had Trace Jackson Davis and Robert Williams both go to the Bulls and Kuminga go to the Blazers. Now, while I was doing this, I was thinking, instead of Robert Williams, what if they end up taking somebody like Jeremy Grant? And is that possible? Is that possible that the Bulls are able to get Jeremy Grant? And I know like he's not what he once was, and like, but his like contract isn't insane, and they would have to move $3 million. So to get that deal done, it's not impossible. Would that then be the Blazers being able to just eat Javon Carter? Because you would have probably just throw in Javon Carter to make that deal work. And yeah, that deal would work. Kuminga and Carter, and then you have Jeremy Grant go to the Bulls. That isn't insane or out of the realm of possibility. It would just be a difficult one. And if we're gonna just, that could be a kind of guy that you use Kevin Huerter for. I just think like you'd rather just let the money expire at that point than to trade Kevin Huerter. Now maybe you go to the Pacers and you can get an Obi Toppin and like Jarris Walker, as they maybe don't want to be paying Obi Toppin $14 million a year. You send Kevin Huerter, and Kevin Huerter straight up making $18 million a year. I don't think they'll be able to just, they can just do that. And you walk away with a young guy and Jarris Walker as a reclamation project, and then Obi Toppin as a front court player who floor spaces. I don't think that's insane. That one's like kind of within the realm of like reality. Like I would not at all say it's preposterous to think that they're a team that wouldn't want to try to improve, their shooting, while also the Pacers being a team that would want to gain cap flexibility. Now, the Sacramento Kings, this is a squad that we mentioned earlier, and they've been mentioned much in this because they have multiple players. They could be a fire sale. I mean, they could maybe make a killing on charging people certain rates for their players, which if they do that, it would be great. Now, the Sacramento Kings are a team that have just been dealt a bad hand. The roster was built terribly, and that's Vivek Ranadivev's fault. So now they need to figure out, either they're going to try to push through and make this work, or move DeRozan, Sabonis, or Levine, or all three of them. They're 7-22. And yeah, let's get right into it. Like, comment, and subscribe. They have a negative net 10 rating. This, we're going to do two versions of the fire. I've said it before. If they're going to do anything, they're basically going to have DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine go to the Bulls, and then Sabonis hopefully be sent to like the Wizards or the Raptors or whatever team, or the Blazers, who might pay or give them anything, just young players and salary relief. So for the Sacramento Kings, I think Jonathan Kuminga is perfect for them. He would give them a reset. Kuminga is 23 years old, an athletic upside. Acquiring him allows Sacramento to pivot towards a younger timeline, to bet on his potential if they wanted to keep him. And then they would get cap flexibility because he has a team option that they could decline. And then if they really want to bring him back, they can bring him back on a 1-year deal or a deal on their terms on a cost controlled contract. Same goes for Kyle Kuzma. He'd be a guy who fits the need of a forward who can score and switch defensively. More importantly, his contract situation allows the Kings to reshuffle their financial deck while acquiring a competent starter. And then Bobby Portis would then allow them to move or have someone play with Sabonis, as I think Bobby Portis and Kyle Kuzma are the two players that, even if they were just trying to do a move where they bring in a veteran presence, some additional front court scoring that can help stabilize a locker room that is either transitioning or having a fire sale or really just serving as a flippable asset, he fits that role well. So we're just going to show you what those deals look like and what they could mean. So first off, I think the biggest thing here is looking at a guy like Jonathan Kuminga and what that deal would be. Is it the Sabonis deal? Because that's my assumption. You're like, we're gonna do the Sabonis deal here, unless it's the Malik Monk deal. Unless you're getting a chance to get off of Malik Monk's contract, which isn't Malik Monk and Keon Ellis or Malik Monk and Devin Carter the ones. I think it'd be Keon Ellis, because no offense to Devin Carter, who I'm a big fan of, he just hasn't given any rival team or people like confidence that he's going to be able to perform, to do what is expected. So that's the big question right here. So if you do not the Sabonis deal, this deal would work. Keon Ellis and Malik Monk for Jonathan Kuminga. The Warriors said they didn't want the long-term money of Malik Monk. So that's the big problem right here. So then it's Sabonis. And if you're doing the Sabonis deal, it can't just be Jonathan Kuminga. It'd have to be like Buddy Hield in there. And even if with Buddy Hield in there, they're still about $10 million away from making that deal financially feasible, which is that Moses Moody then being thrown into the deal as the easiest way to make that whole. And then do they offer up like Doug McDermott and Drew Eubanks as salary filler or roster filler on the back end, which is quite possible. It's an interesting one to say the least, because it would have to be done a certain way. And yeah, it would have to Kuminga, they're hard cap. So this would result the Warriors crossing the tax apron, handicap them. This trade isn't possible without removing $5 million in salary. So even if we took out Drew Eubanks and McDermott, and then they would just convert their two ways into standard deals if possible, they would have to clear right here. Again, says it's not possible without removing $915,000 in salary. So that would mean they would have to include another player, which would be Trayce Jackson-Davis. And this would probably end up being maybe a multi-team trade, because they wouldn't be able. So yeah, right there, you can do the deal right there because it becomes compliant. It just wouldn't be able to happen until January 15th. And Moses Moody, Trayce Jackson-Davis would be the sweeteners. Buddy Hield could be a flippable asset, and then you get yourself cap relief if you're the Kings with Kuminga. Now, we mentioned earlier Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis. There's two ways that you can get both of those players. I think that involves you either sending Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan to the Bucks. DeMar DeRozan, I've said time in and time out again, is the easiest deal. Bobby Portis, Mr. Gary Harris, and our boy Cole Anthony, who out of the three, Ryan Rollins, Kevin Porter Jr. is the odd man out. And boom, you get yourself the bailout artist that the Bucks crave, and Bobby Portis gives you a guy that is a flippable asset and fits with the team. Cole Anthony will be gone after this year, and Gary Harris has a player option that he'll pick up, but you could move off him, and it's a minimum contract that doesn't put you in like basically a juxtaposition. Now, you can also do this deal just a Kyle Kuzma swap. That's the other option. And that's kind of like one that's been floated around. I think the Kings would probably have to throw in somebody, or like Kyle Kuzma has more value than DeMar DeRozan right now. It's not like they have a bunch of value, either of them. And then if you want both of them, that would end up being the deal that we've mentioned earlier being the Zach LaVine package that would be built around Bobby Portis and Kyle Kuzma's contracts being combined to being enough to make that deal financially feasible. I don't see any other team being willing enough to take on Zach LaVine. DeMar DeRozan, you could say, could go to the Clippers, and the Clippers offer you like a John Collins, where you end up doing a deal like a Zach LaVine to the Clippers, and they offer, I mean, you would have to like have them include Bogdanovich in there just to make that work, because the amount of so you'd still have to $4.4 million needs to be included by them. So that's where this becomes difficult, because I guess Bradley Beal's contract could be included as a trade asset in theory. Maybe you say, here's Chris Dunn, and you try to pry a Keon Ellis off of them, which financially they would be hard cap, and this deal they would have to take off $498,000. So either a player like, by the way, you couldn't have Keon Ellis, you could just do the deal like this, or you have to include Kobe Brown, but that would make the deal feasible if you were going to do Zach LaVine, and then John Collins and DeMar DeRozan can just be swapped straight up. So Sacramento, they're in this situation that it's a hard one to see them getting out without making a move that is basically beneficial to one squad because you're helping them, and it's kind of like it's a weird one. It's like quid pro quo. Now let's move to the next team, and what do we got here? Head honcho, we're gonna do the Brooklyn Nets, and then the Portland Trail Blazers, and then we'll do the Sacramento Kings. So we're gonna do right here the Brooklyn Nets, because I think they're an interesting team that could really benefit from being a mediator, facilitator, and a team that kind of like takes other teams' not wanted parts and is able to kind of like swallow salary as a result. I think that's what they would be doing. Now, am I blind and didn't put the Brooklyn Nets on this board? That is quite possible. Wow, I don't think I put the Brooklyn Nets. I missed the Brooklyn Nets on here. All right. So we're just going to talk real quickly as an intro for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, the Brooklyn Nets are a squad that is 8-19. They have a almost -5 net rating. I think they're a team that is going to be able to just focus on building assets. Like they'll be a team that can help any team, like take on bad contracts that are attached to a trade sweetener. And I think that's what you need to do if you're in the business of rebuilding. And that's what Brooklyn is doing. So Brooklyn will continue to call teams up about their jaded or discarded or wannabe discarded goods, as they know they could be the mediator for making those dreams a reality, as long as they include a sweetener of a young player or draft picks. Anthony Simons is one that we've mentioned earlier, but the Celtics are desperate to dump the $27.6 million salary Simons is basically owed, and that would reduce their tax burdens. The Nets can absorb this contract basically through trading one player or making this a multi-team trade. It's not like they still have the salary that they did in the offseason. And I think having a guy like Anthony Simons expiring and them having role players like Terrence Mann really makes this work. And then, of course, D'Angelo Russell has been an absolute shit show in Dallas. He's a salary dump candidate of $5.7 million, and he has a player option next year. So D'Angelo's only been good in Brooklyn, it feels like, and he struggled so far in Dallas, 40% from the field, and the Nets can take another flyer on their former all-star to help, be like a pro and a mentor, and they could probably acquire a second round pick for taking him off of Dallas's hands. Then Gabe Vincent on an expiring contract. And similar to the Simons logic, the Lakers might be looking to move Vincent's or Maxi Kleber's $11.5 million deal. And the Nets can facilitate this by sending Haywood Highsmith and absorbing Vincent to gain draft assets. So, like, I don't think that's insane. Also, I just realized my camera stopped working. And I don't know if anyone noticed that, but let me fix it. I don't get why, like, I'm out of focus. Okay. No more camera. Did my phone die? I think my phone died. That's so weird. What? Okay, I'm so confused right here. Yeah, this should be charging. This is weird. Somebody, can you guys hear me? I'm still, like, my mic's still going. Okay. We just have a black screen, so that's odd. I don't like that. I don't know why it happened. Alrighty. We're right here, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about that. We're going to have to just change cameras and continue the show. The show must go on. Now, the Brooklyn Nets, as we were saying, I also have to, like, completely change the angle of where we were at. But the Brooklyn Nets, it's blurred now, it's black. Yeah, thanks, man. I don't know what happened right there, but I guess my phone stopped charging. I have, like, a second phone that I was using as the camera, and it just kapooted on itself. So I don't know why that happened. I'm pissed, because we were fine. But let's get right back into it and talk about the Brooklyn Nets and what they could do. We mentioned some of the deals that might be in the realm of possibility for them, and that is basically taking other people's junk. And look, it's not the most, like, desirable business. Also, I need to change this light. Turn off this light because it's creating a glare. Now, here I have returned. Now, I know I'm going to have to edit this Brooklyn Nets one actually the way through. So if we look at the Brooklyn Nets, and if you guys will notice, I'm now changing the angle that I'm looking at because I'm looking at a different camera. But I think looking at the team like the Dallas Mavericks being the first ones that they could, I think Haywood Highsmith would be probably the player that they would trade in this because he would fit what Dallas would want. A 3-and-D guy who fits their culture or their culture that they have. And he's on an expiring deal. So if it works out well and they're kumbaya, he could come back on a deal. And D'Angelo Russell goes to the Brooklyn Nets. I feel like that's just the easiest way to do that deal. Unless they're able, I just don't see any other version of that deal going through. We mentioned the Los Angeles Lakers, and that is one that I think when you look at how that deal would have to be done, also, let's just go like this. If you look at how that deal would have to be done, I think the biggest thing is seeing that, man, I don't know, would it be Jared Vanderbilt? I think they like the defense that Jared Vanderbilt gives, and I think it would have to be Gabe Vincent would be the guy. Would that then be, as I've mentioned already, a Haywood Highsmith? I think in an ideal situation, could they send Maxi Kleber and Haywood Highsmith for, I don't know if Deron Sharp would have enough, would be too much trade value. Maybe they give up, instead of Maxi Kleber, you give them Dalton Connect because you don't want to give up a draft pick. And then it turns Gabe Vincent and Dalton Connect into Haywood Highsmith and Deron Sharp. You get another big, and you get a two-way guy in Haywood Highsmith. Now, Haywood Highsmith is somebody that has like played a lot of big games for the Brooklyn Nets, not the Brooklyn Nets, for the Miami Heat. And this season, his injury, from my understanding, he's progressing through on-court work, but he's still not been cleared for full contact 5-on-5 drills, according to Eric Slater 4 days ago. So that we don't know if he's going to come back this year. So that's the biggest thing that we have to acknowledge when you're looking at him. Now, Anthony Simons, how would the Celtics entice Brooklyn to take Anthony Simons? I said the easiest way to do this would be just Terrence Mann and Mr. Haywood Highsmith. I believe that deal just goes right there. Yep. You can have them just eat that salary, and you tell them, here, no picks, nothing involved. You take off Terrence Mann's money and we get the cap flexibility. Now, is there another way for this deal to happen without Anthony Simon? I mean, without Terrence Mann being involved? It's a bit harder, as they would have to basically cut or send another. They have to send $10 million or like $12 million to make this deal work. And then you would have to start stacking contracts, and that's where it becomes hard, because the only way I see in a realm of possibility that would be something that they would do, man. And would you send Xavier Tillman? Because I do think they value him as a leader and as like the older guy in the locker room, and they don't have to include him in this scenario. I just have Anthony Simons and Chris Boucher going there, because that's $29 million in salary. So what I was going to say is the only other way I see them maybe doing something like this is that it's the Ron Sharp with Haywood Highsmith, and is it a Zaire Williams or I just think Jalen Wilson and Tyrese Martin, they make too little money to be, so it would have to be like a Zaire Williams. So you end up having like Chris Boucher and Anthony Simons turn into Zaire Williams, Daron Sharp, and Haywood Highsmith. That could be one that I think works. Maybe you have the Celtics throw in as a trade sweetener. Man, who would be the trade sweetener in this whole situation? Or maybe they do include Xavier Tillman, so it's just a 3-for-3 swap. I think that's another one that's in the realm of possibility. It's definitely a situation that I didn't know what would be the right way to kind of like look at it, or to say that this is the right way. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you guys expect the Brooklyn Nets to do? I just don't think, outside of like these moves, it's going to be a hard like pill to swallow that maybe not as many teams are going to be wanting to play ball as much as they would like. So that's just one that I was thinking about. So let me hear your thoughts on that one. Now, the Portland Trailblazers are a squad that seemingly could get back into contention if they make a couple of the right moves. I'm not going to talk about Hanson Yang. That's just not going to be discussed. But we're going to talk about the Portland Trailblazers' need for some outside shooting. This is a team that currently, if you have been following what they've done this season, they are in the play-in hunt. They are a team that maybe could go ahead and be a part of the playoff race, and I think that'd be huge. So let's discuss what the Portland Trailblazers are doing. And at 12-16 with a -3 net rating, they need outside shooting, ranked near the bottom of the league in 3-point percent at 33.5%. What is a young guy that they could get that maybe they take a flyer and that would address their biggest need? Quentin Grimes. He's shooting 37% from 3, and he plays energetic defense, secondary playmaker. He fits the timeline of the young competitive group, and he's someone that is going to be a free agent this offseason, as we're able to agree to an extension. So as a result, he's been someone who is kind of playing to earn his next deal, and maybe they get a deal with him that's a steal, or he ends up just being a rental piece. And I think that's something that people should consider. And this year, in comparison to the year before the Sixers, last year it was a revelation, but so far this year he's been 15 points per game, 36% from three, still been solid. Then Cam Thomas, he maybe is just a rental piece, or he's someone that they bring back. Another guy who just took a qualifying offer and is going to be an unrestricted free agent in the offseason. He's a walking bucket who can improve a team that ranks near the bottom in three-point efficiency by creating high volume looks from the perimeter and just being a willing shooter. And one of the things is that I think for them, Cam Thomas maybe works and they extend him, but he could be the perfect six man for a team like this. I do think Cam Thomas had his best as a six man. Now, Kevin Huerter, he's an expiring contract. He's had a terrible year. He's a movement shooter. He's a great spacer. And maybe you move off of Jeremy Grant. You can somehow get or use Robert Williams to take on the expiring contract of Kevin Huerter. If he works, you bring him back. But just adding him would open up the floor for Portland's guards and Shane Sharp and Denny Avdia, Tamani Camara, and improve, hopefully, their league worst 33.5% three-point shooting. So if we just look at what they're going to be able to offer or what they could put together, here are the trade or here's the trade machine behind me that this would look like. So let's go ahead. And in Portland, there's a couple ways that they could send or receive Kevin Huerter. Robert Williams makes 13.3 and he kind of fits what they would want. So this is the easiest way to get this deal. This would mean Vucevic got traded. So it'll probably end up being a bigger trade where Vucevic gets sent somewhere else. And we talked about that earlier. The other one is a Jeremy Grant deal where maybe you can pry or get Jeremy Grant dumped there, and in exchange they send you Kevin Huerter and like Javon Carter, which allows you to get off of the money, and maybe even the Blazers offer some draft pick compensation for the Bulls to take Jeremy Grant's money. But Jeremy Grant gives them a two-way player who's had a bounce back year that fits what the Bulls need in terms of defense while also giving them some scoring. We mentioned the other guy that I would say that they're interested in, Cam Thomas in Brooklyn. This is where it gets a little bit interesting, because what would you offer Brooklyn besides draft pick compensation that they would deem worthy for Cam Thomas? That's kind of where it gets difficult, because you look at the roster. I don't know if there is that. Like, legitimately, I don't know if they have somebody that is of interest for them like that. Maybe like, I think they'd rather keep Shane Sharp. Maybe it's a Matisse Thybulle. Maybe it is a Robert Williams, and they're just trying to get cap flexibility in this. They're just going to trade Robert Williams to a third team. I think that all of that's in the realm of possibility. Or even would it be a Chris Murray and Blake Wesley? I think Matisse Thybulle would give him a guy that they could flip, and he also would be just a 3-and-D guy who just doesn't need much handling, and they give up some second round picks, and that's what entices the Nets if they don't get a good enough offer. Now, Quinn Grimes on the Sixers would, I think, be a bit harder to pry, just because he's a good player and one that is going to command a salary. And this is them probably bringing in a rental piece that they hope to convince to stay. Now, would you then, again, like, use a Matisse Thybulle, who, if they do this trade, they would be $1.4 million over the cap, and there could be a guy like, man, I don't know, maybe it is an Eric Gordon that they use as a trade sweetener to get them over or under the first-apron, because Eric Gordon and Quinn Grimes from Matisse Thybulle draft pick compensation of several seconds or maybe a first, and you get Quinn Grimes as a rental to help you out, and maybe under the table you can agree to a handshake extension. I think that would be the ideal situation. Now, the other one is maybe it is a guy like Robert Williams, and because they want some defense and another center and Andre Drummond, maybe the knee injury ends up being worse. I just find it hard for them then to find another salary that they could stack. I think Kelly Oubre is kind of important for them. So then that's where I go, like, would they then want like a combination of like Keegan Murray and Blake Wesley, or Duop Reith to give them another big? Those are like kind of the other guys, and that's where Maybe it is a Blake Wesley and a Duop Reith or a Chris Murray, because that does allow the money to work. And he provides them, I think, with what they would need. And that'd be shooting and Quinn Grimes, just secondary playmaking. I just think it would be a risk, because is Quinn Grimes going to be enough to put you over the edge? And that's where, if I'm the Blazers, you're really just trying to move Robert Williams and Matisse Thybulle to places. And one of those places could be Orlando. I think Orlando would be like, if you take Jonathan Isaac, if they just don't play him, his contract becomes unguaranteed. And Tyus Jones has just not worked out. Could this end up, and I know Tyus is on a 1-year deal, but we just didn't include the assets that would be sent there. And it would be Matisse and it would be Robert, which the Magic would be taking on $2.8 million, and they'd be 3.2 over the First-apron. So technically they would have to send in another player in this deal, which Jet Howard is a guy that had his option declined. And you could say, okay, then take Duop Reith as the other one, and they're $52,000 above the First-apron. And this you get Jonathan Isaac, who becomes non-guaranteed. You cut him, and then you get 2 expiring contracts in Tyus Jones and Jet Howard. Jet Howard could be a reclamation project. And then the Magic get out of Jonathan Isaac. They get a backup big. They get a 3-and-D guy in Matisse Thybulle and a reserve big in Duop Reith. So, like, I don't think that's, like, insane right there. So what do you guys think so far of that? And we're going to go ahead and do the final one, which will be the 76ers. So let's go ahead and do that. I appreciate everybody who's been kicking it with me today. It's been fun. I don't even know if I put the Sixers on here, because what I found out was I didn't have the Brooklyn Nets. So is the Philadelphia 76ers on this list? No. Another team that I forgot to include on the actual list, but it wasn't because we were going to make a video of them. So the Philadelphia 76ers this year, I think, are a bit more competitive than people would think. I think this is a team that, if I go to my notes right here, I've actually enjoyed what Nick Nurse, you guys all know I'm a huge Nick Nurse fan, but I think Nick Nurse has done a really good job of playing the young guys and basically having this team ready to move on from Joel Embiid if necessary. Look, they've had unreliable health from their star players. They have a middle of the road net rating of plus 1.4, and Morey should look for a sneaky play rather than a major swing, which again, they could use Quinn Grimes in the contracts that they have. So with that being said, who are some of the players that I think that they should maybe go out and look for? That's something that I think is going to be interesting for them to find. Like, could they get a Sam Hauser by trading a Quinn Grimes to the Celtics? Is that too much of a risk that you're taking by trading for that? Or is there an Ayo DeSumo that you would go after? Because you have some contracts that you could use. Really, it's Quinn Grimes' contract that you could use to acquire a player that could be of service for you. Now, it's just hard because I don't know if there is a great one. Like, look at this. Let's go over here and pull up the trade machine. Quinn Grimes for Nick Richards, is that like good enough for anybody? That's where, like, I think you say that and you're like, I don't know if I'm the Suns, I'd be stoked. But if I'm the Sixers, do I feel like I'm getting robbed at that point? Because you're just trying to flip, and the Sixers are the 4th seed currently in the East. So what you're trying to do is find yourself a asset that is going to be like look, A1 head honcho. Grimes trade is tough because he has no trade clause since he took the qualifying offer. It's not a no trade clause. It's a right to trade refusal. They can trade him. He just has to say yes. And I think Quinn Grimes would say yes if he has the opportunity to play and he's not going to a crappy team. So, as I said, Nick Richards, would you want Nick Richards? And I mean, I would love for them to get like Ryan Dunn, but I don't think that's going to be possible. And maybe could they pry a Rasheer Fleming? I just think that would be hard. So would you do a deal that looks like Royce O'Neal for Quentin Grimes? Royce O'Neal is having a great season and he's still a solid player. I know this would put them $572,000 over. So you throw in like Eric Gordon. And then I think if you just have them send like Nigel Hayes back, dang. So Nigel Hayes makes, so you need someone making like 1.7, which would literally be Rasheer Fleming, who maybe you could pry Rasheer Fleming, who's just not playing for them right now. And you walk away in this deal with Royce O'Neal, who's a role player that any contending team would want. You get Rasheer Fleming as a switch big developmental project, and you move off of Eric Gordon and Quinn Grimes. And you kind of get compensated with a role player and a project that may work out. Now, I think the biggest part is looking for another deal like Utah. Could Utah be like, look, Bryce Sensabaugh just can't play defense? And would they maybe a Svi Mikhailo, who's just older and doesn't fit our timeline? That really seemed like maybe a Kevin Love could also be replaced in this deal. But you do a similar thing of an Eric Gordon, Quentin Grimes deal that ends up seeing Grimes and Eric Gordon turned into Bryce Sensabaugh, which he'd have another year on his deal. He also will be a restricted free agent, and you get a pretty solid 3-point shooter in Svi Mikhailo who could fill out the back end of the roster. Now, maybe you want another big, or you can include another player in here, which I don't know if you would include another player. Like Kyle Lowry is just Nick Nurse's one of his favorite players, so I doubt they would include him. And in this scenario, I was gonna say, do you have like Kevin Love just thrown in? Because you could have Kevin Love just thrown in there, and like I think this would be a solid deal for the Sixers. You're just trying to like not lose Quinn Grimes for nothing. That's the biggest thing, is what I think you're trying to do here, and find a deal that'll give you what I would think is proper compensation for a player that is solid and is going to get paid. And like Tari Eason, damn. Yeah, no, Tari Eason could actually work, because I was talking to somebody the other day, I spent from the 18th to the 21st, I was in Orlando for the G League Showcase, and the Rockets they didn't extend Tari Eason, but they're looking to move on from Tari Eason in terms of developing guys and drafting a guy to replace him. You kind of touched on it there. Quinn Grimes played at Houston. He's a Houston guy. This kind of makes sense, and he would be the type of player to like tell him like, hey, I'd probably resign if you'd give me the opportunity. Now, the Rockets would go $1.8 million into the apron, so that's where I think, do you see them throw in a Aaron Holiday? I don't think they could take Eric Gordon, because then that would put him back, even though Eric Gordon's prorated. So literally, unless Clint Capella was tossed in there, which I doubt. I think they really like having him there. So it would have to be something like this, where Tari Eason, Aaron Holiday, there isn't a minimum contract that I could see being thrown in there. Maybe, and I think that would be the deal. Because now you get Tari Eason, who's going to be a restricted free agent that you have the opportunity to extend. He fits this team really well. And you get Aaron Holiday to be a shooter for the squad. And I do think this might be the best package for all teams involved. And it's not out of the realm of possibility if you just look at like what they're, I did not mean to highlight that, what they're looking for. Getting a defender like that would be, I think, a revelation for Nick Nurse and his squad. So that's where I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Shout out A1 Honcho here for like literally a pretty solid shout out to Tari Eason. Now, the only other team that I could see maybe wanting to pick up, like the Brooklyn Nets, maybe want to do something that we could do. I could see like the Pelicans, like Jose Alvarado for a Quinn Grimes. And again, you could do it like this. Well, the Pelicans, this is what I was about to say. Could you do a deal? It's probably going to have to be something like this. The Pelicans don't pay the tax, so you wouldn't go into the apron. And again, it's the Quinn Grimes, Eric Gordon. You got yourself Sadiq Bey, who'll have one more year on his deal, and so will Jose Alvarado. And those are two role players that actually would fit what the Sixers are doing. Now, the Brooklyn Nets, I think this is, maybe you're looking at a Deron Sharp, maybe you're looking at a Haywood Highsmith, or even a Cam Thomas. That's kind of what I would think. I think it'd probably be like a Deron Sharp. I don't think you'd be going for Terrence Mann unless, yeah, like, see, because if you even traded for Terrence Mann, you'd have $5.4 million that you would need to plug, which there's no way of plugging that salary because they don't have a player. So that's kind of the whole juxtaposition that you get put into when you look at the Sixers squad. So that was it. That was my thoughts on the Sixers and what they could do. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you made it to the end of the video, I do great, or stream. I appreciate every single one of you for making it. I really enjoy it. That's going to be it for today. Yeah, I'm gonna head out. Peace out, guys. I'm going to end this right now.